Hello, and welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics riff out on step 3 and step 11, as prescribed by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, who encourage us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. We speak to people with all manner of higher powers, from those who might be atheists, Sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, paganists, non-duality. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and carry the message. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who have different spiritual practices than us. It's all about live and let live. And please remember, if you've never been here before, this is not an AA meeting or an AA podcast. It's just some people's version of the truth. Sometimes we seek to seekers, to gurus, people not necessarily in recovery, but mostly to people in recovery. And today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're talking to Doc D. Doc D is a clean and sober gay polyamorous man who will celebrate 33 years of continuous sobriety on the 20th of May 2021, HP willing. He works with sponsees, a sponsor, and is of service in and out of meetings. He knows that program and he treasures his recovery. And that's short but sweet, but because I wanted Doc really to tell his own story, so I'm just asking you to unmute there if you wouldn't mind, Doc. And it's really good to see you. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
So let's just start off with your story. Now, I know a fair chunk of your story. I've heard you speak before, but we're really interested in your higher power. But can you tell us a little bit about you before you got sober? What was Doc like, and what was your spiritual outlook in life before you came to these rooms?
Well, I think it's probably easiest if I actually just kind of briefly tell my story.
Sure.
That'll give me. I was born into a family of folks for whom the answer to all life's questions were geographics. My family never had a problem that was driven by internal circumstance. It was always the fault of the job, the car, the house, the city, the boss, the neighbor, whatever. Add that to the fact that my family had a consistent way of dealing with life, and that is presenting a particular image to the outside world, and yet that was not our home life. So I grew up in that circumstance. I grew up with a mother who was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and a father who was had substance issues. I wouldn't really define them as an alcoholism, and was a womanizer. Their solution to every problem was to move from one house to another. I lived in 15 houses by this time I was 17 years old. And I went to 11 different schools. So I was always the new kid on the block, and I was always the guy who was trying to fit in. And in attempting to fit in, I continually wore a series of masks in order to be what other people wanted me to be, in order to be accepted. Never worked. My background. I was baptized Catholic in order to appease my grandparents who were Cajun, and I was also baptized Methodist in order to appease my other grandparents who were Danish. That way, everybody was going to stay happy. And so my religious training was catch as catch can, and it was always whatever is most convenient. I ended up, in the course of my youth, I ended up falling in pretty strict continence to the Catholic Church. Because no matter where we moved, I could always find a church, priest, nuns who would have the same story. And that was a consistency in my life. So it provided me a lot of support. The Catholic structure provided me a lot of support. I realized by the time I was 10 or 11, though, that what I considered the contradictions within the confines of the faith did not provide me or allow me to think in the way I was beginning to learn to think, which is critically. And at least I hope I do to this day. And so, but during the course of my upbringing, my parents moved. They drank, they partied. When I was 15 years old, I had my first access to alcohol that was unsupervised. I was staying and, in quotes, taking care of my aunt's home while she was away for a few days. And she had a pint of rum and a half pint of gin, or the other way around. And the only mixer she had in the house was root beer. And it was a 6-pack of root beer. And I mixed it all into a punch bowl and drank it all. That was my first blackout. And at that point, I swore I would never, ever drink again. Within 30 days, I was drinking almost every day. Within 90 days of that time, I was smoking pot frequently. I continued that through high school. I graduated from high school early. I went on to college. I chose the college that had the reputation for being the most, it was listed by Playboy that year as the biggest party school in the nation. And I chose it specifically for that reason. It was also convenient. I have to tell you, it was convenient where I lived. So it made good sense to me. During my freshman year of college, I started using what were called cross tops. Some people call them white crosses. They're small white benzodrine pills that truckers use to keep themselves awake. I found they allowed me to drink more, and I also found they allowed me to take tests and study at the last minute. I did that through the following year. And then found through. It was a time of great revolution in the country. It was the late 60s and early 70s, and drugs were considered one of the ways that one achieves spiritual access. And I found speed, and I thought I had gone to heaven. In fact, I actually considered the fact that at that point that I would be using speed until the day I died. I had no intention of ever quitting. During my teenage years, I attempted, and if we're going to keep this in spirituality, I attempted and looked into everything from Buddhism to religious science to Zen to just about anything you can think of. The only place I didn't go was the Church of Latter-day Saints. But I investigated it all in order to see where I fell. And with my background and my orientation toward the sciences, none of it really made sense to me. So I basically became an atheist at that point. I continued using and drinking. I did a geographic to Europe in order to get away from myself. I was there for almost a year. I got in trouble in Spain and France, and actually I got in trouble in Spain, France, and Italy, but and ended up having to come home. I was here for 2 months. I went to Mexico. I was there for 11 months. I did the same thing. I got in trouble. And the great thing about Mexico was, at the time, one could walk into a pharmacy and buy prescription strength amphetamines across the counter. So it was quite an undertaking. I came home from I left for Mexico weighing just shy of 100 kilograms, and I came back from Mexico probably weighing about 75.
Wow.
Between the speed and having what's called the trots, I had intestinal issues due to the water and the food, and I lost a tremendous amount of weight. It came back looking like a scarecrow. None of that hit home when I was about 20. I was about 22, 21 at that point. I moved in with the person who I had known from high school. She was also somebody who had problems with substances. She was also going to college. All the rest of the friends who had lived in that house with her had graduated and moved on because they went through their studies consistently. She did not. She was at the end of her second year after 4 years of going to college. I moved in with her, and being the logical guy that I am, despite the fact that I knew internally I was gay, I married her. It was a nice way to keep up false front, and it was a nice way to continue the lie. We had a physical relationship, but when we had been married 5 years, we had a child shortly thereafter. About a year and a half thereafter, we split up. I had a couple of instances where I had a couple of instances that were moments of clarity induced by people around me, including my older sister, who at one point said to me about my daughter, she said, Ariel, when she was little, was a happy little girl. And when she was 18 months, 2 years old, during that time, I had stopped using speed and I had reduced my alcohol consumption, and so had her mother. We both took off about when she was about 2. We both started drinking and using fairly heavily again. My wife's drug of choice was marijuana in addition to alcohol. Mine was speed in addition to alcohol. By the time she was 4, my older sister came to me and said, are you doing the same things to her, i.e., ignoring her, making her always second, not paying attention to her, not being good parents? Are you doing the same things to her Mom and Dad did to us? And it was the first moment of clarity I had. And it hit me like a rock, but it took me quite a number of more years to actually do something about it. I came out of the closet. I got involved with a man. I did a geographic again to try and stop using drugs and alcohol, but the geographic was to Las Vegas, Nevada. And I don't know if I think it's a pretty well established fact that if one wants to avoid drugs and alcohol, moving to Las Vegas is probably not the best idea in the world.
Sounds like a perfect idea. Great idea, Doc.
So I moved to Vegas. Part of my story I rarely tell, but since this meeting is centered on spirituality, I will tell it. At one point in Vegas, it became quite obvious that I had quit using speed because on the way to Vegas, I had abused speed in addition to a large bottle of Jack Daniels in a rental truck in the Mojave Desert at 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So what's that? It's about 50 degrees C. Wow. And there was no air conditioning in the truck. And I got to Las Vegas, and I ended up in the hospital. And the doctor told me I needed to quit using. Well, what he said to me was, he didn't actually tell me to quit using. What he said to me was, I saved you this time. Only you can save you next time. I knew exactly what he meant. I mean, he knew what he meant. So I did that. I continued drinking, however, and drinking excessively and using other things. Along about August of that year, which was 1987, I found myself in St. Thomas's Church on Tropicana Avenue in Las Vegas. And I was on my knees praying the statue of the Virgin Mary to help me with this. And it didn't feel like I got any answers, but it started me down a path of trying to move things along. I ended up being fired from that job because my former lover called and outed me. I ended up moving back to Northern California where he was, and moved in with him, which is what one does when one is, and he was drinking and using at the time. And he ended up being arrested. He's quite a bright man. He had a master's degree from Cornell University. He ended up being arrested for a series of DUIs. He was already on probation for another series of DUIs. And so he ended up going straight to San Quentin prison for 2 years. which is the way it works here. That was a godsend to me. He was no longer in my face. December 31st, 1987, I made the decision that I wasn't going to drink or use anymore. For 6 weeks, I had to keep that commitment to myself with him drinking and using next to me. 5.5 weeks in, the sheriff came and got him and took him away. And I had the opportunity to not have that presence in my life all the time. In the following week, I got a really good professional job, the first one of my life. Within a few months, my daughter came to live with me because her mother was still acting out. I moved, and then came my last, and this is where the spiritual component of this wraps in. Then came my last episode. After 5 months and 18 days into me white knuckling it through not drinking and using, my employer sent me to a golf tournament in one of my old stomping grounds, and I went. I was the only one from the company who went. It was time before cell phones, thank God, pagers, but before cell phones. I don't, look at me. I don't look like a golfer. I'm not. But I went in glad-handed, and I walked into a ballroom at the end of the golf tournament, and there was already wine poured at every station for all the 200 guests. I drank a glass of wine. I drank another glass of wine. I drank more later. I remember being at the bar later that night, and I remember being at a gay bar sometime in the following blackout period. I woke up 36 hours later in somebody's bed. I didn't know how I got there. I didn't know where my company car was. I didn't know if I had a job still. But the most important thing is, at that moment, I did not remember where I had left my daughter. Now, I have left her with my ex-sister-in-law, who is a really responsible individual. But at that moment, I could not remember where she was. And I howled like an animal. I literally started howling like an animal. And it was the first time in my life I had ever felt entirely and completely powerless. And it's also the first time I ever surrendered. I had probably dozens of times of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization that would take any rational man and make them stop drinking and using, and they never got through the sixth call. This incident did. So I got up out of that bed. I went to my first meeting that day. I found my company car. I realized where my daughter was. I had not lost my job, and I ended up going back to the town I was living in, and started going to meetings very regularly. I found the issues around God in the big book, the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, and the 11th step prayer extremely off-putting. They reeked of Christian fundamentalism to me, and I had a hard time dealing with that. But I was desperate, and I continued moving forward despite my objections. And what I did was I started transliterating into terminology and a framework that worked for me. I'm very much a scientist. That is my background. Mm-hmm. I have a belief based in science that the universe is connected through one giant energy field. I have a belief not based in science. There may be many more things within the context of that energy field that I don't understand, that we don't understand, that tie us together. In working through that, a lot of different things came to the fore.
Doc, can I just Doc, can I just interrupt you there, just to go back to the science thing? So your belief in the interconnected and the giant energy field is that's science-based belief. Is that what you're saying to
Yes,
me?
it's a
Okay.
science-based belief.
Okay.
There is indeed an energy field that pervades the universe. It's here. This is a given scientific fact. I have now attributed more interconnectedness to it than possibly science would.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But that's a framework that works for me. I took the steps. I used them as a framework to pattern my life. They worked incredibly well for me. I had no ground rules growing up. It was manipulate, lie, do whatever you needed to do to get by and look good. So the steps for me were a revelation. I finally had a methodology because I'm a process guy. I'm a mechanical engineer. I had a methodology for moving through life in a way where I could be accountable and responsible and be kind to others. And I had a framework for doing that and a framework for personal growth on an ongoing basis. So the steps to me were the basis of my program more than any HP was at the outset. And I moved well through them. It took me a bit to get involved with them. It's another story. The first 18 months, I was kind of petrified of the rooms. And so I would go, I'd read the literature, but I'd be the last guy in and the first guy out. I never fellowshipped and I never listened hard to anybody who told me to stick around after the meeting. At the time, I attributed it to being unlike y'all. And what I realize now, it was all based in fear. And I was fearful and I didn't do anything. About 18 months in, my pain got bad enough that I asked someone to sponsor me, and we worked the steps. And this is a part of my story that is very meaningful to me. We got through step 8, and at that point, I got a call from the town where my ex-wife lived, and it was a drug counselor at a 28-day rehab that she was in, asking me to bring my daughter and come participate in the family week. That was the final week of the program where the families would meet with the people who were in the program. They would meet with each other as a group for 6 hours a day for 5 days. And my initial response was absolutely not. I'm not doing this. I am not going to put myself in that position. And I talked to my sponsor about it, and he said, absolutely yes. In fact, he said, F yes. You're going. And I thought about it, and I acceded to it, and I went, and I took my daughter. It gave me the opportunity to do my 9th step amends to my ex-wife in front of her family in the kindest way I could figure out, to tell her I'd always known I was gay. She assumed I was bisexual. I'd always known I was gay, and basically I had used her. And I tried to do it in a way that was as kind as I possibly could. And she seemed to accept it, and it seemed to help our relationship. It definitely helped my relationship with her family. I left that room that day knowing something, and that was knowing that not only could I change by using the program, I already had. I had already changed. The program had already changed me.
Wow.
So, and my program took off, and it's had ups and downs in the intervening years. Mm-hmm. And I've come to a particular view of the way the universe operates, my higher power, and where my place is in that. And I'll just leave it there for
Right.
David for any other questions you may have.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and that's an amazing story, and I've heard you a couple of times now, and it's been a pleasure to getting to know you, Doc. So let's get down to the brass tacks, for want of a better analogy. Let's talk about steel ritual. So, how did you? And just to say as well,
Okay.
the tattoos and the piercings. I think that's everyone's looking at you and they're seeing the way you look. How did that start? How did this process start in terms of your step 11? How did this all come together for you?
Okay. Well, okay. It's actually, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but it's not a brief story.
That's okay. We're here to listen, mate. You go.
Okay. In the course of doing spiritual exploration, I had an event happen to me at 10 years where I was literally within seconds of using. And while I don't specifically believe in divine intervention, it's as close as I've ever felt to that. I felt like I was being pulled out of there. And I didn't use. And I cry about this. And I didn't use. And I came back and I had a period of what my sponsor has often called the lost years. She says people between 7 and 10 often experience a time when they pull away from program. And I had been through that. And I called her the day of that event. And I actually, the day of that event happened at like 2 a.m. And I said, Cynthia, and I told her what happened. And I said, I'm back. And she said, well, welcome back, honey. So we began some more spiritual exploration. I began some spiritual exploration. And what ended up happening out of that was I kind of confirmed my scientist view of the universe. I'm not an atheist per se, but I'm very damn close to an atheist. I believe in the interconnectedness of things. I came to experience, I came to study some Buddhism and Zen Shintoism as a kind of an intellectual exercise. And what I came away with is, for me, the best thing I can do is simply acceptance of life on life's terms, which is really the basis of Buddhist practice. And so I started down that path. I'm also fascinated by tattoos. I'm heavily tattooed, and I'm heavily pierced.
Just for the people who are listening, because we have this on audio as well, can you just tell us how much is covered of your body is covered with tattoos?
I am covered from my neck to my ankles, everywhere in between, everywhere. I became fascinated with tattoos when I was a teenager, and I have been heavily tattooed literally since I was a young adult. I got my first tattoo at 13, my first shop tattoo at 17, and tattoos for me are a method of self-expression, and they probably have a sexual element to them as well. So the issue around tattoos and piercings, I worked a professional job, so until I retired, I had nothing visible below the wrists and nothing visible above the neckline. Sure. I did have my ears pierced for the last 10 years of my job. They were plugs. They weren't quite as big as the ones I have in now, but I worked at a very liberal company in San Francisco, and that was not a problem. So I am fascinated by tattoos and tattooing. After I retired, my avocation, which was I had learned to pierce in the 1980s, became a vocation, and I started piercing professionally and ended up part owner of a shop. In the course of doing that, I met some people for whom body modification and extreme body practice were a method of finding spiritual enhancement. And I decided to give it a try. I ended up involving myself with a group called Edgewalkers, who are people who explore through extreme body challenge, and they explore their spirituality. There are people of all faith backgrounds who attend. They do things like body suspensions. So you're literally suspended off the ground with hooks. What are called hook pull dances, where hooks are put through your skin and you dance for anywhere from 5 to 10 hours with other people who are attached to you with ropes, also with hooks through their skin. Fire walks, glass walks, sweat lodges, and quite a number, and kavati, which is even the most extreme of that.
Could you describe kavati to us as well, please?
Kavati is small swords put through the skin while you dance. And it's done in a way to achieve spiritual practice. It's based in Hinduism. So I became involved with that group. And then when that group kind of moved in a different direction than I was moving, I ended up involving myself with another group called Ritual Steel, and I'm involved with them to this day.
Okay. So I guess the question is how does body challenges, like you say, extreme body challenges like that, like suspension, so the hooks through the skin, I've seen pictures of it, and we spoke about it the other day. So you're hung, suspended in the air with the hooks through piercing your skin, and you're hanging basically like a fish hook, I guess, for want of a better word, and then you're hung from a frame or from a platform. Is that right? Is that pretty much
a frame, a platform, a tree? Give me 1 second here.
Sure. We're going to get a photo.
Well, you could get a photo. You could get a photo, but I think probably me being able to figure out how to do that, get the photo off my phone.
It's all right. Okay, so that's the hook.
That's the hook that goes through your body.
Could you hold that up closer to your camera for us to see? So for people who are listening, it's kind of like shaped kind of like a big safety pin, but it's kind of oblong and it's got the circle sort of hinge. It's what's it made of? Is that's chrome? That's steel?
It's surgical grade stainless steel.
And can you show us where the hook bit is, where the pointy bit is, or that shows?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The point is here.
Uh-huh.
Let me put that. The point is here.
Yep.
The way it works is an 8-gauge piercing needle that you would use to pierce for other, so to put a body piercing in, is used. It's put on here, and then that goes through the skin, and like this, and then the hook is closed, and that's closed.
Clasped. Yep.
And then ropes are attached here.
And which parts of your body do you get? Is it every part of your body that's pierced with this?
I've only suspended from my chest and my back.
Okay.
But people suspend from their legs, from their face, from their any body part.
Okay. I mean, the most famous one I can remember, I saw the film, the Richard Harris film, which is a great film, A Man Called Horse. I remember that was quite shocking in its time. And so is it based upon Native American practices? Suspension?
Actually, there are multiple cultures, including Southeast Asian cultures, Indian cultures, and Native American cultures, all had some form of suspension involved within their religious practice.
Okay. So, Doc, just going back to your scientific basis, and I was interested in what you said about almost being an atheist, because that's fascinating. How does this become spiritual for you? Because I'm just going to ask the dumb guy questions, but I would imagine there's a sharp pain, and it's about pain. It's enduring pain. How does this become a spiritual event for you?
Well, within the context of endorphins, when your body releases endorphins, it changes your mental state. allows you to endure pain much more easily. I'll tell you, the times I have suspended, the pain is the initial shock. Being in were you to be able to see pictures of me suspended, and I don't know how to do that here, but were you to be, the look on my face is rather a look of ecstasy. And that is the most common reaction to being suspended. It allows one to live in a very slow time frame. Everything becomes you become hyper aware of what's around you, hyper aware of color, hyper aware of sound, and it changes the mental framework, which allows me an opportunity to look beyond myself. I know people who literally keep their eyes closed the whole time and meditate the entire time they're suspended, the same way someone would in a sweat lodge.
How long are you suspended for?
The longest I've ever been up is 45 minutes. Some people suspend for hours and some people for 5 or 8 minutes at a time. It depends. I also have become, because I am a licensed piercer, I've also become quite adept at helping people suspend should they want to. And, within the context of my community, that's looked at as helping people on their journey.
Okay. That's I think we've got a captive audience here. Everyone's hanging on your every word. It's fantastic. And so what you're saying there is it's kind of like you said, time slows down. So you spoke about that energy field. You kind of transcend time and space. You become hyper aware, and that's the spiritual experience.
Yeah, for me that is. I've also seen in others, it wasn't for me at any point. It hasn't been for me at any point. But I've seen in others whose journeys I've helped, when I've pierced them and helped suspend them, that a lot of people relive and deal with past painful experience and trauma through this. And it can be incredibly cathartic for folks who are in that particular situation.
Wow. So it's a chance of shining a spotlight on past trauma through the experience.
Through the experience, exactly.
Fascinating. So just again to go back on the atheist thing, and that's interesting because I know there'll be quite a few people in this room. I'm looking at a couple of them now who'd be interested in that. Why do you describe yourself as almost an atheist? So what are you, 8/10 an atheist, 7/10 an atheist? Where are you, and why? Well, I'm fascinated.
The issue around why I the terminology for that I adopt for myself is the word atheist, is we don't really have words in English that describe where I sit on the spectrum. I consider most formalized faiths religiosity. That's my interpretation of it.
Dogma.
They are a framework by which humans explain the universe that is oftentimes unexplainable, and it gives people a foundation for living their lives. I have no objection to that. I do not judge it. Everybody's welcome to it. It doesn't work for me. So my framework is my view of God, my view of the higher power, has absolutely nothing to do with not only the white guy sitting on the throne in heaven, but with anything that looks like a being. There is no element of being to it. It's an element of existing, an element of universality. So there's this universal field. We're all part of it. It is part of all of us. And that is not an entity. And most people view God as some form of entity. And so therefore, that's my higher power.
When you say entity, there's no kind of divine intelligence, is what you mean? Is that you say there's no
Right.
agenda? Okay.
There's no agenda.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So
now, that said, I have seen some remarkable coincidences in my life. Some things that are unexplainable to me. And I simply accept them for what they were.
Such as?
And are. I've seen things where a confluence of circumstances was so highly unlikely, the odds of, and I don't want to get into details here, but the odds of something coming together on that score are unbelievable. I had some personal experiences. You know, I was driving down the street in my truck when I was 22 years old, and I stopped at a friend's house and called my mother and said, Bestamore, which is my grandmother, said, Bestamore just died. And Mom said, how do you know that? And I said, I just know. And it was true. She had died literally minutes before. So how did that happen? I have no idea. The difference is I don't need to explain it. I simply accept that it happened.
Okay. That's been fascinating. And just again, not to be morbid for anyone here, but can you explain the sword piercing thing? How long are the swords and whereabouts do they go?
Kavadi swords are normally about
2 feet.
a meter,
Okay.
foot and a half long. They're normally placed underneath substantially heavier parts of tissue than a piercing hook. A suspension hook actually goes through your skin. Your skin is quite strong, really quite strong, and it can hold your body weight without a problem. Normally, even big people, two hooks, at most 4 will hold almost anyone, unless somebody has some kind of condition. They're quite strong. Kavadi swords actually go underneath muscle tissue. So they'll go. A Man Called Horse, the film you were talking about.
Yeah.
They didn't actually pierce him through the chest. The way they indicated that they pierced him was actually underneath the pectoral muscle.
Sure.
That's right. So that's where a Kavadi sword would go, underneath the pectoral muscle.
So it goes in under the breast, sort of above the nipple?
Yes.
Okay. And then that's hung from those, and there's 2 put in, and and then you're hung from those as well? Or is it...
No. The Kavadi you're not hung from anything. Kavadi is simply you take, and two would be a minimal number. Some of the Hindu practitioners in India will have 12 or 15 of them in their body. So,
Doc, and what about the like you said, so heavier people, taller people, people of most sizes and ages? Is there a health and safety thing involved with this? Is it regulated? I'm interested just to know who can do it. Anyone here wants to go ahead and do it, then maybe just to let them know how they can.
Well, there
I know Donald and Rita there are dying for a go, so they might be up for it.
There are suspension groups literally all over the world, and I know that there are several in London alone.
Wow.
There are all over Europe. We actually had a suspension in Spain, 2019, a little town in Spain. So there's suspension groups you can become involved with all over the world. Some of them approach suspension as an art form. Some of them approach suspension as outrageous practice. And some, like the groups that I've been involved with, approach suspension as spiritual practice. One of the great things, I'm at this point, like I said, almost 33 years clean and sober. One of the wonderful things about the people that I involve myself with is while some of them have the occasional drink or smoke smoke marijuana on occasion. It is absolutely forbidden to do that when we are actually doing this practice.
Okay.
That would be the one way you could actually get yourself kicked out of one of these groups, because the issue is that people, the expectation is that you are going to be present for yourself in pursuit of the suspension, and present for others who are suspended. So that's a really great thing. So I know lots of people who are ostensible normies who absolutely during the course of a weekend do not drink or use anything.
Okay. So it's treated with respect, the utmost respect, as a spiritual practice. It's
Exactly.
yeah, okay. Yeah, so I imagine there will be thrill seekers and people who do it for various reasons, but it's a serious affair. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So just to say to everyone here, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask Doc, put it in chat and I will relay it. And I just a couple more questions. I just wanted to talk about you personally, your personal situation. So when what's it like in AA meetings? The AA meetings that you go to, I'm assuming you go to AA meetings. What's the response from AA people when do they know about what your spiritual practices? How are you welcomed? Is AA good to you?
Yeah. I mean, excuse me. This really gets back to my AA's a combination of the big book and Buddhist practice. It's my acceptance of the situation as it is. One of the best things I was ever taught by anyone is I have a different. The first sponsor who I worked with when I went to see my ex-wife is long out of my life, but I've had the same sponsor. My second sponsor in life is a woman who she and I will have been together 28 years as sponsor and sponsee come December.
Wow.
And one of the things that she really saw in me was an over awareness of other people's views. And so we spent a couple of years working on one of her tenets, which is other people's opinions of me are none of my business. And when I finally got that down, I go to meetings, I share about what I want to share about. I share within the context that is appropriate for program. I don't need to explain a suspension to somebody to talk about having a spiritual revelation. People have those in their own context and they understand what that means. I never denigrate somebody else's way of viewing the world or God or higher power or anything like that. I've had a few people in open meetings when I started talking about my space structure basically tell me that one of these days I'll grow up and I will accept that there is a white guy on a throne sitting there telling everybody how to live their lives. And I always find it amusing.
You mean suspended from the clouds?
Yes. Well, and so now I'm just going to say something that I have offended a lot of people with over the years. I think Chapters of the Agnostic is one of the most reprehensible, arrogant pieces of bullshit ever written on the face of the earth.
Wow.
It is so incredibly condescending to people who have a different belief structure. It is the equivalent of white privilege to me. It comes from a place of, if you just stick around long enough, little guy, you'll believe. No, I'm sorry, I find that unacceptable. There are parts of the big book I like and parts I don't, and that's when I don't.
So you think so? We agnostics is not your favorite chapter in the big book.
Yeah.
What was do you have chapters that you do like? Is there anything in it that you do like? This is interesting because we've had a big theme on the big book over the last couple of months. So I'm interested to hear what you think. Does it need rewriting?
Well, there's even though it contains the word God, the ninth step promises, and I think that's pages 83 and 84 of the big book, ninth step promises, are incredibly meaningful to me. I have to kind of reframe the end of that in order to take the structured God belief and make it fit my framework.
Yeah.
But the ninth step promises are exactly that to me. They're the ninth step promises. We've done the work. We've actually gone through a process of making change in ourselves, and the world's changed. And part of that for me, the way it works is, I don't believe necessarily that higher power is intervening to make my life better. I believe that I've stopped intervening to make it worse. I am now working in concert with a universal flow as opposed to fighting it. So that's the way I look at God.
Okay, good answer. Just I wanted to just talk also. So you're happily married, and can you just tell us a little bit about your personal life, your home life, and does your partner do suspension? Is your partner sober? Your husband?
My husband is. We met at a gay and lesbian AA conference, gay LGBTQ gay AA conference when we were both just past 3 years sober. We've been together basically ever since. He is the light of my life. We are also polyamorous. We have a third who lives with us and has been part of our lives for 8 years. James and I will celebrate 30 years come the 4th of July this year.
Wow.
And Renee has been
lasted that long. That's amazing. Do they?
Yeah, they do. And Renee has been part of this family now for like I said, it was 8 years in January.
Wow.
So
there's the three of you in a house, I guess, for people who are in a sort of a monogamous dual relationship. How does that work? Is there jealousy involved? Or is it all just everyone knows where everyone stands? How does that work?
No, there's not really jealousy involved. Have you ever heard of the word compersion?
No.
Many people have not. It's a word that was coined probably about 6 or 8 years ago by people who are polyamorous. It's joy when someone you love is in love with somebody else and having a good time.
How do you spell that?
COMPERSION.
Okay.
So that's we're actually a pretty happy crew here. COVID's been more problematic for my husband James and Renee than it has been for me, because Renee is a man who is highly social. My husband is a man who is highly social, and I am a man who is mostly an introvert. So we have at least had the company of each other during the past year. So, and at one point, for about 5 months after my daughter was furloughed from her job, which she returned to in late September, my daughter's now 40. We are very close. My partner and I raised her. And she was living with us for the first 5 months of the shutdown in the United States because she didn't have work and she didn't want to be alone in her apartment in LA. She wanted to be with us. So
she's doing well. She's happy life.
Yeah, she's dating somebody I really love and respect. She's worked for the same company essentially since about a year and a half after college. She's worked. She led their operations in Honolulu. She worked as a upper level director in their operation in New York City, and she currently works for them in Los Angeles. And she loves what she does. She's in the fashion area, fashion design area, and she loves what she does.
Oh, man. That's fantastic. So I'm going to just get a few questions before I go to the questions that we got. I'm going to bring in our regular panel member here, Joe C. Joe C from Toronto. Joe, you've got a question?
Hey, Doc. Thanks a lot. That was absolutely great. I live in Toronto. It has a pretty vibrant BDSM scene, alt living scene. People can spend their nights in clubs and their days in business towers, and sort of, you either get all in or just sort of be curious. Just as an aside, Reverend Ward Ewing was the one-time non-alcoholic chairman of the AA board of directors, and so he's at the bottom of our inverted triangle. And he was asked to speak because he was very friendly with atheists and agnostics, and tried to champion a pamphlet about that in the 2010 to 2014. He was invited to the first ever agnostic atheist world convention in Santa Monica, and to speak. And he was very relieved to confess to all of us that he thought chapter 4 was just horrible. Like, he worshiped AA, loved what it did, but just thought it was just, theologically disconnected, just anyway. So your feelings are shared by many. But the question I'm asking is for people who are sober, because the club scene, the alternative lifestyle scene, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol. It's often in wet places. And if they're in recovery and they want to just sort of explore a little bit, is there like a dry community where they're not going to be faced with a lot of drugs and alcohol?
There's absolutely. I've been a proud leather-wearing member of the community now for 36, 37 years. There are very strong sober communities within that confine. Most of the major leather and BDSM events in the world have actual AA meetings at them. You can go to a program meeting in the course of the event. So one of the biggest leather convocations of gay men in the world is called International Mr. Leather. It's held in Chicago every year. There are two meetings a day, and they're non-specific meetings. They're not AA or NA or everybody in this 12-step program, from any 12-step program, is welcome. So yeah, there's tremendous support out there. The problem is finding it. So, and there are alternative sexuality meetings in some places. Los Angeles has a number of them. San Francisco has a number of them. I can't imagine there wouldn't be ones in London and Manchester and major cities around. And I know there are in Chicago. Several of my close friends actually run those in Chicago. So.
Oh, thanks very much. Cheers, Joe. It's good to see you, mate. And personally, I like we agnostics. But it gave me a lot of hope when I came in. It's maybe less so now, but it certainly did. But that's my opinion, and that doesn't really count. So Adrienne asks a question for you. Do people who engage in this practice follow dietary guidelines, and what other practices do they have in common?
What other practices do they have in common? None whatsoever. I know people who are incredibly muscular and people who are not incredibly muscular, who are quite large. I know people who are very, very concerned about making sure that they eat only an extremely healthy diet, and people who do not do that. And like I say, we have people who are traditional Christians, we have people who are Buddhists, we have people who follow other paths, Shinto and other paths, and who are all participatory. The variety is, and every orientation, every color. So it's quite a diverse group. What we have in commonality is this seeking a path to spiritual development.
Okay. Thanks very much. Now, Becky from Nova Scotia. In suspension, who puts the knives in or the hooks, and what do you do with the wounds after, and how often do you do it?
Okay, well, there will be in suspension, there'll be a piercer. I am sometimes that man. The process is ascertaining what the person. In our case, our kind of suspension that we do within the confines of ritual steel, it's an iterative process. I sit down and I talk with these people about what they want to do, how they want to pursue this. And so we decide, are they going to be, I have one person who I'm very close to who likes being suspended in the lotus position. So he has hooks through his back and hooks through his legs, and he's suspended in a lotus position and he meditates. And I've seen him up there for 3 hours like that. So it depends on what they want to do as to where I'm going to place the hooks, how they're going to be suspended, and what their purpose is in this. Is it simply an exploration for, is it a novelty? Are they dealing with some trauma they're trying to deal with? And then we go through a process of talking about that, and I help to guide them through the process. When the hooks are taken out, very often what happens is a lot of air has gotten under the skin. So part of the process of my job is to make sure I expel all that additional air from that wound. Now we use practice. We use the same practices one would find. I want to say a surgical suite, but that's not accurate. The surgical suites are absolutely sterile. We use the same practices as one would find in an extremely adept dentist's office. Everything we do, everything we use, everything we do is sterilized in an autoclave. Our hands are cleaned. We wear gloves. We use sterile practice or clean practice. Sterile practice only happens in the operating room. We use the cleanest practice we can possibly use. So infections from these things are almost never happen. So I pull the hooks, I expunge the air, I tape over the openings, and depending on person's physiology, their weight, their ability to heal, it can leave small scars, it can leave slightly larger scars, it can leave no scar. And it can take, some people 2 days later, they don't have any experience of pain from touching the site. Some people, it takes them a couple of weeks. Personally, about 3 or 4 days afterward, I've been, I stopped actually feeling the intrusion points. But I need to tell you one thing: when you're as tattooed as me, being suspended is something your tattoo artist will hate. Yeah. Because everywhere those hooks go through, they leave little white dots.
Oh. Wow. When was the last time you did your practice?
The last time I suspended others was in October of 2019. The last time I suspended was in April of 2018.
Okay. Are you looking forward to getting back into it when everything's back and running?
Absolutely. There's an entire group of us who are already talking online about when it's safe and when everybody's vaccinated, when the people in the group are all vaccinated, how we're going to get together and have a suspension. We'll probably also be doing a fire walk at that point and a sweat lodge.
Amazing. Oh wow. Now your close friend and another person who comes to this meeting regularly is Virginia. She's got a question.
Hey, Doc.
Hi, Virginia.
Hey, so I know that when I had my back tattoo was being outlined, it was a 9-hour process. And I didn't know it at the time when I went to the store to get the stuff I had to put on it. I had that out of body experience. I had that transcendent because the endorphins were just railing through my body and I was vibrating literally. It's very addictive.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question is how do you differentiate between it being addictive and being, so to say, divine? And do you understand what I mean by that?
I do. I understand entirely what you mean. One can. I'm sure that there's an element of this that has to do with endorphin rush. And I don't dispute that whatsoever. The thing is, it's the endorphin rush that gets me to a place where I feel like I can actually make some sort of transcendence there. I have a younger sister. There are four of us in my family of origin, 4 children, and every one of us has an obsession with something. One of them was food, one of them is work, and I have a younger sister who is, by her own admission, a crisis addict. If she doesn't have a crisis, she will invent one because she's addicted to adrenaline rush. And so I think there's an element of this that could actually be looked at as that. But it would be one thing if I was rushing to suspend myself 3 times a week in order to, but this is a calm, pursued path that has been done in the context of fellowship and brotherhood with others, community with others, and is guided. Somebody is with you at every moment in this process. So the way we do it. There are other people who do it differently.
Cool. And did you do any when you were in Japan?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, you and I can go talk about that later. Japanese culture is Japanese culture. I spent a lot of time in my life in Japan, and Japanese culture has some real peculiarities, and I have a feeling suspension would not be high on people's radar in Japan.
All right, that was it. Thanks.
That's cryptic. Okay. Well, listen, I think that's the last question. I've got my final question, as we always do. So, but I just wanted to say thank you very much again, Doc, for coming along.
Thank you.
And to Anne K, to Joe C, to Virginia for getting you along as well. Thank you very much. So the last question is something that we always ask all our guests. And I'm just going to give you please don't say the big book when you give an answer for this one. Okay. Just anything but the big book. Okay. So here we go. Doc, you've had a massive windfall. You've struck rich. You've won the lottery, or whatever it is that you call it over there, the lotto. You've won $1 trillion, $1 trillion. You decide to pack all your family, your husband, and in your polyamorous relationship, and you've got into a big super yacht that you've bought. You put all your books and all your favorite things, and you've got your portable suspension paraphernalia all there on deck, so you can suspend on deck. And you set sail for the South Pacific, and you're cruising along in your big yacht. And all of a sudden, off the coast of Fiji, you strike a coral reef and you start to sink. all you've got time is to get your family overboard. They swim to a deserted island nearby, and all you've got time is to get a plastic bag and your favorite book from the bookcase, chuck it in the bag, dive overboard, and swim to safety and await rescue, where you've got this book to read. What's the book? Who's it by, and why? Here we go.
It's easy. Don Miguel Miranda, Don Miguel Ruiz, Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. And for those who haven't heard of this book, it is a short little treatise that basically encapsulates how to take program into your life on an ongoing basis. This and the 12 and 12 are my kind of like my go-to books. Okay. Now, of course, I'm going to forget the Four Agreements.
Okay.
Be impeccable with your word. Assume nothing. Take nothing personally. Always do your best.
Fantastic. Thank you. And who was the author? Just for anyone who's never heard of that, could you just tell us the author again?
Don Miguel Ruiz. Don Miguel Ruiz.
Okay. Can you hold the cover up again for us, just so we can see? Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, listen, amazing. I think that's, again, we just keep having great episodes every week, and this has just been a classic. I want to thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind hanging around afterwards, I'm sure there's a lot of people that'd love to have a chat with you. But sure. I'm going to stop recording in a minute. And just to say to everyone, we have a PayPal account where we want to keep this meeting going. It's on Zoom. So it's at gilwriter@hotmail.co.uk. We have a PayPal account. So just a couple of bucks. If you're here, if you feel generous, then send it over to us. And as I say, we just to keep it going, we've been doing this day in, day out. And Anne Kay has been a massive shot in the arm for this. She's the one who sort of keeps it going in the background. But thank you so much, Doc. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.